It's the first week of January and time to start looking ahead at the new season that's upon us. We're going to talk about some best practices to keep you catching on this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I'm Chad LaChance, and you're listening to Fishful Thinker, the podcast. All things fishful, all the time. Hey guys, Chad LaChance here. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. Of course, brought to us every week by the fine folks at Sportsman's Warehouse. Visit them at 140 plus stores nationwide or sportsmans.com. Also, don't forget about the fine folks at Peterson Toyota in Fort Collins, Colorado for all of your car and truck needs. First week of January, holidays have come and gone, New Year's has even passed, and we're looking ahead at the new season at this point. And what that means for me, being in the fishing industry, typically is this the time of year where you're going to start looking at consumer shows of all kinds. So consumer shows for me, something like the Denver International Sportsman's Exposition or the Denver Boat Show, things like that. And what that means is I'm in front of a crowd and I'm trying to give away information the best I can, teach people a few things that'll help them catch a few more fish or motivate them, maybe entertain them a little bit. I love being in front of a live crowd. It's invigorating and it's just great to see a bunch of faces out there always that they're just wanting to advance their angling skills. And I can see when the light bulb goes on, but don't get me wrong, I also love live radio and all of those things as well, but there's something about having the crowd right in front of you that's one of my favorites. But the information doesn't seem to really change for me, whether I'm going, in front of a live crowd or a radio interview with Terry Wickstrom on ESPN Radio or TV shows or whatever. I try always to supply some useful information for the year or for whatever is relevant to what I'm talking about at the time. And in this case, it's for the coming year. So I thought I'd talk about basically 5 key things that if you will focus on, they will help you be a better angler in general. And they're kind of broad items to some degree, but the flip side of it is they all have relevance to all the different kinds of fishing. So I'm not talking about if you're just a trout fisherman or if you're just a bass fisherman or you're just a whatever you are, fly fishing, spin fishing, whatever, it doesn't matter. What I want to talk about is some really key fundamental things that I think are very important. So I'm going to dive right into it here. I don't see any point in outthinking it, so we're going to dive right into it. And the first thing that I'm going to recommend that will make you a better angler all the way around, and it will make you a better outdoorsman and in some ways better at almost everything. But after 20 some years of doing this for a living, 20 years of guiding, there's one thing that I notice a lot of people when I'm in the boat with them or fishing with them that separates really good anglers from average anglers a lot of the time. And particularly I notice this on guide trips. The first thing I'm going to say is be more observant. Pay more attention to what's going on around you as it relates to the fishing. And keep in mind, this could also be hunting for that matter, but the fishing particularly. And the reason I say being more observant is stuff will happen over the course of a day. And what I notice is that as a guide, that a lot of anglers don't even notice it. It goes in one ear and out the other, so to speak, or it just doesn't register with them that it might affect anything. And it could be little things. It could be changes in wind direction that will reposition fish. It could be changes in light that'll change your requirement for lures to up your catching a little bit better, where all of a sudden it starts getting dark out from cloud cover or something like that. It could be a difference in how the fish are feeding. It could be, that all the birds that were roosted, all those seagulls that were roosted on the lake are now starting to spiral their way up and sending scouts up looking for food. And it's, representing a change in the food chain that's about to happen. Could be same thing with the herons or the kingfishers that have been roosted and now they're feeding, or conversely, they were feeding and now they're roosted. Anything like that, but being as observant as you can, watercolor changes, temperature changes as you move around, anything like that, being very, very observant and at least considering whatever change you saw as part of your decision process. Do I need to make a change in my location because of this, or a lure color change, or is there no change at all? Or maybe I can fish more aggressively now because now fish are feeding the birds are up and feeding, which tells me the fish are up and feeding, because really it's all tied together in one big circle. So just being more observant as to everything that goes on around you, everything that you notice will make a big, giant difference. And it's one of the reasons I recommend people wear good quality polarized sunglasses, because it will allow you to notice some things you might not otherwise. Typically watercolor changes, things like that, changes in grass lines or vegetation lines, things, whatever. But it's just really important that you be observant. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. Be observant and at least consider what any of those things that you observe might have an effect on your angling. So that's the first thing. The next thing I'm going to say is very, very important, is focus on your fundamentals. You don't have to be good at everything. You just have to be really good at a few key things. So focus more on your fundamentals day in and day out. If you focus on the fundamental stuff instead of the trick lure or the tiny little nuances, you're going to be better off. And I see people get hung up on the nuances of details in lures or particularly with lures, I guess I should just leave it there. And it really doesn't, it's not the key, right? In other words, let's just pick a random lure and say my jerkbait. If my jerkbait is more or less the right size and more or less in the right area of the water column, it will get bites regardless of nuances in color or how I'm necessarily working it, something like that. So I see guys that always are looking for an easy answer or a trick or whatever, and really if you just focus on fundamental stuff, feeding times, fundamental lure selections with your confidence lures, just good overall best practices, good knot tying, tackle management in general, the fundamentals of angling rather than the tricks, rather than the shortcuts, you're going to do better off in general. I think that is a key thing. It's kind of a big statement when you say focus on the fundamentals, but the reality of the situation is a lot of people don't. And I can tell you that I can sum it up with the email I get most commonly. What are they biting? Well, that's not a fundamental at all. They could be biting any one of things. I get that email all the time. Focus on the big picture stuff, the fundamental stuff, not some little nuance, and you'll be fine. So I see guys, I just had a conversation with a guy who swears that if his lures don't have purple in them, they won't catch fish. That's a nuance. That is not a fundamental. And I can promise you that that's not the right things for people to be focusing on. So focus on being in the right depth range. Focus on your retrieve styles. Focus on, being in the right areas in general, responding to what's going on around you, the big picture things, not the little nuances. You'll be better there. So that's a key thing right there. Don't outthink it. Get good at a few different presentations and use them a lot. And the next thing I wanted to talk about, and this one's a little bit bigger, and that is varying your retrieves. And this one's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, because 20 years of guiding, I see guys, even when I'm talking with them about it, that routinely want to throw bait out and wind it back in, and that's it. And they're not mixing up any of the retrieves. And there's kind of a two-part thing here with these that I'm going to go to the other part of it, so I'm going to skip it right here. But the varying retrieves could be the speed of the retrieve. It could be the stop and go nature of the retrieve. If you're talking about something that you're working with the rod tip, how hard are you working at with the rod tip? How long are the pauses or no pauses, as the case might be? All of the little differences that make whatever lure or bait you're throwing move alive, move naturally. There's really nothing in nature that just takes off going 50 yards in a straight line at the same speed all the way through. Realistically, nature's more organic, for lack of a better way to put it. And they move around in different ways. So if I'm going to throw a crankbait, I'm going to either steer it a lot with the rod tip, whether that be left and right or up and down. That will make the crankbait dive or not dive more, as the case might be, during a specific retrieve. Or I might do a stop and go on the reel and just use the rod to control the speed on the crankbait, or I might work full on jerkbait style on it. But focusing on the variance of the retrieve until the fish either show you that there's one specific thing they want, or conversely show you that there's nothing they want. And that is for sure one of the things that will come to you as an epiphany someday as an angler, when you realize that, oh, wait a minute, it's a matter of every time I change one mild thing, they bite. So it's not about that one thing that I changed, it's just that I changed something that will make them bite. So maybe it's a turn in your cast or your retrieve, or maybe it's the sudden stop one time that gets this fish to bite, and it's the next one that gets the that gets the bait moving that gets that fish to bite. Maybe the next one all you did was steer it a little bit and that fish bit. But either way, what you'll notice is when something in the retrieve changes is when it gets bit. If they're biting on the same change every time, then you can focus on that one for sure. And that's a common thing I'll do with a jerkbait situation. A lot of times with a jerkbait, you can get it down to the exact pause they need to get them to bite it. But more often than not, it's a matter of just keep mixing it up all the time. Don't ever do two retrieves exactly the same. And the more you mix it up, you'll find the more fish you'll catch and the more you'll learn, particularly if you're observant to what was going on exactly when your lure got bit. Did it get bit right on the pause? Did it get bit right when you started moving it again? Did it get bit right when you steered it to one side or the other, or lifted or lowered the rod tip? Whatever that was, you need to be observant, as I've already mentioned, to what the change was to be able to allow it to help you go forward in terms of catching the next fish. But again, it may be that you need chaos to get bites, which is the opposite of rhythm, right? You just need it completely erratic all the time, or no two changes the same at any given cast. But the reality is paying attention to varying that retrieve up. And it doesn't really matter what kind of lure it is. It could be anything from a jig to a topwater bait. How you work it back is almost as important with any given lure as the lure itself. And that goes back to the fundamentals as well. Like the choosing a crankbait is a fundamental item, and then how you work that, right? So I would really pay attention to varying up my retrieves a lot, more than almost anybody I spend time in the boat with, particularly on guide trips. When I get guys on guide trips, even when I get them started with something, doing it a certain way, they'll evolve right back to just an even rhythm quickly. You guys do it very quickly. They'll make the same casting stroke, the same rhythm on the way back with the bait, and they'll evolve right back into that. And then I'll coach them up again and get them doing something different. They'll get a fish or two, and they'll resolve right back to where they were before. So you got to keep that in mind. Varying the retrieves is something that doesn't necessarily come natural, but will catch you a lot of fish. And if it's funny, because when I watch myself fish on film, and obviously having filmed TV shows for 17 years, I've watched myself plenty, drive myself crazy watching myself fish. But one thing I notice when I'm fishing well, my rod tip and my casting is very much different day in and each time. Like I'm very, very much working through a series of things on any given cast or any given series of casts to get something figured out. I'll be varying those retrieves and see what I can learn by being observant from it. So key thing right there. Along those same lines, the next one I want to talk about, which is a little more cut and dried, but still very important, and again, something I don't see guys do, is mixing up their casting angles. So let's assume for a minute you're a bass guy going down the bank, and I watch this commonly because I have a bank right behind my house, and I can see guys come down the bank, and I can watch them just easy peasy. And the overwhelming majority of the guys come down the bank with the boat at an even speed on the trolling motor, making the same angled throw over and over and over again. And ironically, typically the more equipped that boat is, in other words, the more expensive that boat is. So when I see a fully outfitted, new fancy Ranger boat with all the bells and whistles on it coming down the bank, that guy's making the same roll cast 15 times in a row without varying anything up. and they'll turn around and leave and not catch any fish. And the reality of the situation is, if you take one out of every three of those casts and make it 45 degrees the other direction, instead of just constantly leading the boat exactly the same every time. So you're very efficient doing that. I'll be the first to admit you're very efficient. And if the fish are on the chew and they don't care about your angles a whole lot, yeah, you can catch a lot of them that way. But more often than not, you can throw just the opposite angles. Let's start throwing them behind the boat slightly, or straight parallel to or perpendicular to the bank, or straight ahead of the boat. But mixing the angles up will make a big difference in a lot of scenarios, a whole lot of scenarios. It's also why I don't mind fishing behind people. I just pay attention very quickly as to which direction they're casting. And since most people don't mix it up very much, which is why I'm telling you this, it's pretty clear for me to go, okay, well, he's making everything at a 45-degree angle ahead of his boat, so I'm going to come down and make everything at a 45-degree angle behind my boat, right down the bank right behind him, because my casts are going completely opposite of his. Excuse me, even if I'm on the same bait. So mixing up your casting angles can make a huge difference. And just for the record, all of this applies to running water as well, but casting angles particularly makes a huge difference to that, because the fish's relation to the current, it will dictate a lot of things. And so casting angle is very important, whether you're fly fishing, spin fishing, whatever. Equally as important in running water, and could be argued even more so in running water. And usually the first thing I'll try to figure out on any given day on a river is what angles are going to be my most important with my specific baits. Usually with a jig, I do better with the jig coming slightly down current. But that's only usually. Sometimes I need to hang in the current or swing in the current, versus something like a jerkbait or a crankbait in the river. Then I want working across current more. So, but again, those angles are going to make a difference, and varying those angles until you figure out which keys they want will be very, very important. So that's another thing that I see people, if they're walking the bank behind the house, they just stand there and they throw straight out off the bank, straight out. Just keep doing that, and that's fine. But maybe even with something like the trout I've been catching recently, you've got to throw a steep angle straight down the bank, even though they're trout, even though it's a flat bank with very shallow water, and it's December, January. They're still right up on the bank. And if you're standing there throwing straight off the bank, you're throwing 90% of your cast in the garbage. So the angle that you make that cast makes all the difference in the world. And the only way you can learn that angle is to mix it up a whole bunch and see which ones the fish will tell you. So varying retrieves and casting angles kind of go together. Then being observant as to how you got bit when you put those two things together will help you apply it and allow you to stick to your fundamental lure selections by mixing up the other things. That's kind of how the four items here go together to help you out catch more fish. Now, the last thing I'm going to bring up that is I've been beating this drum since I very first got in the fishing industry, and that is casting accuracy and control, line control. The accuracy is pretty clear. Can you set a lure down where you want that lure to go? Maybe softly even, or maybe with a ton of lure speed in the wind, or whatever the case might be. But being accurate is a major bonus in fishing. And some guys will argue that no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter in a lot of cases. If you're fishing rivers, it makes a gigantic difference in being able to hit the seams or be right on the banks. If you're in a boat throwing back the other way, being accurate with your throws can make all the difference in the world along the banks, keep you out of the trees, keep you from frustrating yourself all the way around. More importantly, accuracy will allow you to address targets very importantly, or zones very importantly, and accuracy gives the ability to do that nice and smooth and clean. So, I can tell you that when I have guide trips, guys in a boat, that more accurate of the two casters will almost invariably catch more fish. And it's not necessarily even that we're all about the accuracy on that particular retrieve of being at the minute level, but maybe at a bigger level. He's getting closer to the steeper bank by a foot every time. Well, that extra foot gets your bait down right off the bat, whereas the other guy's casts are landing 3 feet from the bank, and the more accurate guys are landing 1 foot from the bank. The guy that lands them correctly every time is going to catch more fish. Some days it doesn't matter if you're anywhere near the bank, and maybe you're throwing to sticks or lanes in the weeds or who knows what. But the reality of the situation is being accurate and with line control makes a gigantic difference. So it's not just getting the lure there, but it's getting it there, getting the bail closed, getting the rod tip in the right position, and the amount of slack line and control so that you know what's going on with your lure make a gigantic difference. And really the reason I saved this one for last is it's the most important one. If you're not good at any of the rest of this stuff, but you're accurate and in control with your lure all the time, eventually you're going to catch some of the fish. And that accuracy will allow you to really focus on your angles. The control will allow you to focus on your retrieves so that you've got the right amount of slack in your retrieve, especially something like a jig, which is a controlled amount of slack. It's not tight, it's not limp, it's not completely slacked out. It's somewhere in between. That's what I'm talking about line control. And that will go together with a lot of the lures that you do. Obviously in fly fishing, it's even at a higher level, line control, because the line's the whole shooting match. But at the end of the day, all 5 of the things, accuracy and line control, go together. Being observant, focusing on fundamentals, varying up your retrieve and your angles, you put all of that together with accuracy and control, and you are going to catch a lot more fish. So that's my fundamental talk to get the year started. Once again, same as every other year, January, I'll be at the Denver International Sportsman's Expo here next Thursday. So next Friday's podcast will be recorded ahead of time. I'll be there Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Would love to see you guys there. Check us out at Fishful Thinker on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're going to be giving away tickets. In fact, I've got some going right now. If you're a Northern Colorado or a Front Range of Colorado guy and you want to attend the Denver International Sportsman's Exposition, check out our Facebook at Fishful Thinker, and we're giving away some tickets there. Hopefully we'll see you guys there. Also, the new season of Fishful Thinker Television has debuted already. Unbelievably, it's our 29th season. It debuted December 30th on World Fishing Network, and it debuts this Saturday on Altitude Sports Entertainment. So check all that stuff out at Fishful Thinker. Also our YouTube channel, very important to us, so we appreciate it. Thanks for listening. This has been Fishful Thinker, the podcast.